This lesson explores some of the major battles during the American Revolution and how the conflict unfolded from the time that it began until the conclusion of the war. There are many battles within the American Revolution, but there are several that stand out in importance as a result of the military tactics, location, or other events that are tied to these specific battles. Much like other conflicts, there are some battles of the American Revolution that are more important or are remembered more often than others. This lesson provides a brief overview in context of some of the critical battles of the American Revolution. Why does this matter? It's important to understand the various battles that contributed to the success of the American colonists because it illustrates military strategy at the time and what the unique factors were that contributed towards the colonial advantage over the British. There were several key points throughout the American Revolution that it seemed very likely that the Patriots in America would lose their battle. For example, in the fall and winter of 1776, Washington's army had nearly collapsed as a result of exhaustion, the cold winter, and the lack of supplies. Many soldiers who had enlisted had their enlistment terms set to expire by the end of 1776, and what sort of reframed this whole difficult time for the soldiers was that Washington troops were able to successfully cross the Delaware River and defeat the British forces in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. This accomplishment gave a lot of positivity and it restored optimism for the troops. Otherwise, they were completely exhausted and many of them, were very sick and had been suffering for a long time, were not being held to good standards with nutrition. So this sort of a win was really needed for them at the time. So what happened to Washington here is that his move to cross the Delaware was essential for restoring positivity and faith to the troops. Britain's strategy at the outset. Their initial strategy was to contain the revolution to Massachusetts, where many individuals supported rebellion. But just outside of Boston, at the Battle of Bunker Hill in 1775, nearly 50% of the British forces were killed. In 1776, in January, patriots who had captured cannons from a previous engagement were able to reach Boston and use their newly acquired weapons to fortify the high grounds of the city. Recognizing that it would be nearly impossible to hold the city any longer, the British evacuated Boston and moved north to Canada. At this stage, the British strategy was to capture New York, a state where many loyalists lived. Washington's army nearly became trapped in Brooklyn when the British launched a major sea and land offensive, forcing Washington's troops to move into Pennsylvania. At this time, Washington only had 6,000 troops, and their enlistment terms were set to expire very shortly. Being able to defeat the British forces at Princeton and causing the British to redeploy their troops up into New York reinvigorated these worn-out soldiers. So New York played an important role yet again in restoring some of that faith and the willingness to keep fighting. In 1777, the British were aiming to split New England off from the remainder of the colonies. The Northern Army, though, was defeated at the Battle of Saratoga, where 5,000 British soldiers were forced to surrender. The Battle of Saratoga was a critical turning point in the war. It was the success at this battle that encouraged the French to get involved on behalf of the colonists. The French provided military support and funding to continue the fight. And in fact, these contributions from other countries that became involved on the colonists' behalf were really important for the success of the patriots that were fighting for independence because they were just at such a disadvantage in terms of skill, training, supplies, and just general knowledge of fighting war. They weren't really familiar with it. Many of them by this point were tired. They didn't have the proper clothing to wear to get through these long winters. So they really needed the support of outside countries like France. The British Army, outside of the Battle of Saratoga, elected to move forward with plans to capture Philadelphia, where Washington's army was currently defending their capital. Even though the seizure of Philadelphia was successful, The entry of France in 1778, Spain in 1779, and the Netherlands in 1780 on the American side of the war forced Britain to spread their forces throughout their other geographic locations. In 1780, the British did obtain success in outnumbering American forces in Charleston, South Carolina. This year of 1780 became one of the most challenging years in the entire conflict for the Continental Army. Many soldiers were tired of fighting, and they were frustrated about their lack of pay and the conditions in which they had to fight. But the tide was also turned this very same year. As British forces moved north from South Carolina and North Carolina, they encountered frontier fighters engaging in guerrilla tactics. After suffering casualties in North Carolina, the British Army moved into Virginia. Washington recognized this as his opportunity to defeat the British Army. A French fleet sealed off the entrance to Chesapeake Bay, where the British forces were planning to deploy their troops. American and French troops also moved south from New York and the British Army in Yorktown. On October 17th of 1781, a British drummer moved towards the American and French lines, carrying the official white flag of surrender.